When I started color grading, I tried to learn every technique I found on YouTube. Unfortunately, YouTube videos usually equip you with the knowledge, how to do things and not necessarily why or when. This led me to make one of the most common mistakes almost all beginners make. This mistake makes 80% of what you're doing basically pointless, which in turn wastes a ton of time and is really frustrating very fast. It almost feels like gravity holding you back, and no matter what you do, you just cannot get it right. So today I will show you what this mistake is and also why it is so bad. Then I will show you an easy way how to fix this. Quick disclaimer, even though I demonstrate everything in Final Cut Pro, the concept applies to DaVinci Resolve, Premiere Pro, and pretty much all of the other analyses as well. Keep in mind, we want to learn concepts and not just how to push buttons. What many beginners usually do is this. They jump into a clip and apply a color space transformation. It doesn't matter whether it's the color space transformation in Resolve or a color space transformation LUT. With the color space transformation in place, they start to adjust exposure and contrast like this. Something like that. And maybe they do something like this, opening up this image just a little bit more. I think let's park it around here. Little side note, I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt that you know the proper order of operations and that you don't think that you need to grade your log footage manually, whatever that may mean. I already made a whole video on that topic. The link is in the video description. Then they may add another instance of color wheels, like this, and try to take care of their white balance. So we want to run away from that yellow just a bit. I will just eyeball it for now and I think I will park it right here. After that, they usually grab some hue saturation curves, slide them in, and adjust skin tones and whatnot. So for example, they want to correct the skin tone, they may sample the skin tone and shift the hue. By no means I'm doing an accurate job here, it's just for the sake of the demonstration. What they usually do next is jump back out and usually apply an instance of color curves or color wheels to give this a certain look. So maybe we're trying to go for a teal and orange look. So they pull their shadows into the teal, something like this. The highlights in the opposite way, something like that. And maybe balance out those midtones just a tad. Let's have a look at the before and after. So this is before and this is after. And let's say this is the teal and orange look they're going for. Last but not least, they maybe want to add a little bit of film grain. So I will just leave it at that with the default settings. And maybe even a little bit of halation, because this is the vibe they're going for. Once they're satisfied with what they've done, they want to move on to the next clip, and some of the beginners try to be clever and copy the adjustment, select the next clip, and paste the adjustments there. So let's have a look, and surprise, surprise, nothing works out really well. But still, they try to make it right and go into their initial adjustment for exposure, and maybe just pull back those highlights, but as you can see, nothing works out, and basically it feels like starting from scratch. For example, now the look might not be prominent enough, so they go in here and just adjust it a little bit more, but now they mess up their color scheme. So if they compare it to their first clip they graded, okay, it looks a little bit different now. Then they go back to their first clip and try to make it right. So what is the hue I selected with my next clip? But then everything starts to fall apart. After hours of this back and forth, frustration kicks in, and they start searching YouTube for color grading hacks because it just can't be that hard. Okay, let's pause for a minute. If we want to fix what's going on, we need to understand it. First, let's oversimplify the process of color grading and break it down into three main parts. The first part is where you make sure that everything looks somewhat consistent. You take care of exposure and contrast, white balance, and overall image balance. Let's call this normalizing and balancing. Secondly, you would perform any adjustments that involve masking or keying, or any adjustments that are targeted. So if you want to darken one specific part of an image, or you want to change a specific hue, this is where you do it. Let's call this secondaries. Last but not least, you would take care of giving your footage a certain vibe by stylizing it. Maybe you want to add film grain, maybe you just want to do some split toning to achieve a teal and orange look, or whatever. Let's call this third step look development. Imagine these three Lego bricks are your individual clips. So you have clip 1, clip 2, and clip 3 in your timeline. We start with normalizing and balancing, here represented in blue. So we might want to adjust exposure and contrast, and then we take care of the color balance. Then we take care of our secondary adjustments, represented in green. We want to adjust a specific hue or darken some parts of the image. whatever you like to do. Lastly, and because I'm running out of colors, we do the look development, which is red again. Okay, the first clip is now graded. As you can see, now we have a single tower. That means we did 3 entirely different things in one go. Therefore, switching tools and switching context multiple times for each clip. This is mentally taxing and very inefficient. But okay, we will let it slide for now. Then we move on to our next clip. But now we constantly compare the unedited clip to our finished result, which usually means that we want to go there as fast as possible. So we probably half-ass our adjustment for exposure and contrast, then we do some kind of image balancing. But when it comes to color, we are now confronted with the question, okay, do I adjust the color now, or is that something that I do with my look development? Adding insult to injury, this is usually where beginners lose their patience and start to do hyper-targeted adjustments, like using masks or qualifiers to a degree that will just break their image. So, okay, let's add this instance up here. And last but not least, they try to salvage it with look development. Okay, now it might look half decent because we arrived at somewhat a similar goal, but as you can see, our process is very crooked. With that traumatic experience in mind, we try to make it better with the next clip, but in reality, it's just a different kind of weird. Also, did you notice that we do look development on each clip individually up here? What happens if we want to tweak the look a little bit? Now we need to touch every single clip, and as you can see, everything just breaks. This is the exact point where you get frustrated, you open up YouTube and watch color grading videos because it just can't be that hard. There must be something that you don't know. And you may be asking yourself, how do the pros do it? To be completely honest, they don't. At least not in this way. Pros understand that adjustments happen one at a time. So let's start over. Again, we start out with our 3 clips. In the beginning, normalizing and balancing serves to establish a strong foundation for all the adjustments that come afterwards. During that process, we take care of each clip at one time, but we're only adjusting exposure and contrast for all the clips. Like so. Then we do our color balancing, which helps to make everything a little bit more coherent again. As I just said, all of this serves to establish a strong foundation. So this consistency is now represented with this Lego piece. We now have 3 individual clips that are now fairly similar in terms of exposure and contrast, which means they feel like one piece now. Secondly, we want to perform our secondary adjustments because there might be some areas that need a little bit of work. So we do our secondaries on the first clip, on the second clip, and on the third clip, and then we do a second round of secondaries, for example, adjusting some hues and whatnot, and here we go. Ultimately, pros are efficient, which means they don't do look development 3 fucking times in a row. They do it once, further improving their consistency and coherence within their timeline. And in the end, everything comes together as one piece under one creative intent because their workflow is efficient, well-structured, and achieves more and more consistency over time, almost by definition. As you can probably guess, there is not the one perfect workflow. Every reason to do one thing at one time affects another part of the equation. Nevertheless, I'd like to share some of the core principles in action. In this timeline, I have a bunch of log footage from a RED camera. The first thing I will take care of is my color management. This just means that the color space transformation from our recording color space to Rec 709 is being handled by the software for me. If you're working in DaVinci Resolve, you can do that by using your project settings or by clicking these 2 dots. They bring you to the timeline level node tree. You can apply your color space transformation there, and it will affect all the clips in your timeline. If you're working in Premiere Pro or Final Cut Pro, you can just follow along as the approach will be the same. First, I will grab an adjustment layer and place it on top of my timeline. Then I stretch it out so it covers all of my clips in that timeline. Because again, it's supposed to affect all of the clips underneath. Then I pull up my LUT loader, like so, and apply the proper LUT on here. As I mentioned before, this footage is log footage from a RED camera, so I apply the proper color space transformation LUT, and here we go. If you don't have a color space transformation LUT, you can get one from your camera manufacturer. Alternatively, I have a free suite of color space transformation LUTs you can download from my website. The link is in the video description. With my color management out of the way, I can start by adjusting exposure and contrast. Since I'm only concerned with light when adjusting exposure and contrast, I will turn my entire timeline black and white. I do that by using my check layer plugin, but you can also just desaturate your entire timeline at the adjustment layer. But in here, I will just select Luma only, and here we go. Now my image is black and white. This means I can only focus on the light and I'm not distracted by any color information. Next, I will decide on a hero shot for this sequence. And scrubbing through here, yeah, I think this is the one. The hero shot is the first shot I will color grade, and this will be my main reference. Now I jump into my color wheels and adjust exposure and contrast to my liking. So I pull everything up just a little bit, then I will park my shadows right here. And also I want to preserve that moody feeling, so I might lower my midtones just a little bit. Okay, so that's already it with exposure and contrast for this clip. Next, I will pull up my custom workspace with the comparison viewer. So workspace is color grading with comparison viewer, and I will save a still, like so. With this reference right here, I can compare all my other clips to it. So I move on to the next clip. Select it, dive into the color wheels. Again, I will just eyeball it. I think I will increase the overall offset a little bit and then pull down my lift or my shadows. So it looks fairly okay in terms of exposure and contrast. Okay, let's move on to the next clip already. And this is the establishing shot. Because I had a look at this footage earlier, I know there's quite a bit of information in the foreground here. So maybe we can preserve some of this. I will push up my offset quite a bit so we can get our highlights to almost a similar level here, and then I will just pull down my lift, and let's see what that's doing. Yeah, I think we can let that slide, and maybe if I go into my highlights, I can just pull them up a little bit more. Let's see, contrast should be a little bit more stark, but at the same time I want to preserve a little bit more of that foreground, so I might lift up my midtones and bring down my shadows just to compensate for that. Again, for the sake of this tutorial, I leave it at that. Lastly, I can already move on to the next clip. I will also apply an instance of color wheels. And again, I start by adjusting the general offset, like so. And then I will just pull down my lift until I have the contrast where I want it to be. The contrast could be a little bit more stark in that shot, so I will try to pull down my midtones and see what that's doing. And I think we did it. Okay, that's already it. As you can see, we were able to compare the shots to one another because we're only concerned with exposure and contrast for now. Next, let's take care of saturation and color balance. I go back to my hero shot and I will disable the check layer for now, so I can see the colors. I go in here and apply a second instance of color wheels. So maybe I just want to run away from the yellows in my highlights just a little bit and towards magenta, because as you can see, if I disable this, there's a little bit of green going on in the background and I'm not too fond of this, so something like this might already do the trick. Lastly, let's adjust the overall saturation just as a baseline, and I think I will crank it a little bit more and I will park it around here. With that done, I save another frame so we can reference it in my comparison viewer. I move on to the next clip, like so, and I pretty much do a very similar thing. So there's a little bit of a greenish hue in the highlights. So I will try to pull that away from that just a little bit. Something like that might already do the trick. And in terms of saturation, I think we can also boost this just a little bit if I have a look at the vector scope side by side. Next, we can move on to the establishing shot. Seeing this with the color information now, I can already tell I went a little bit overboard with my exposure adjustment, so I will just try to bring that down just a tad, and also the highlights can go down just a little bit. And then I will apply another instance of color wheels to take care of my color balance. Again, the green is a little bit prominent here, so I'll run towards magenta, and let's see what that's doing. So this may be a little bit too much. Something like that works out, I think. For the sake of this video, I will park it around here. Lastly, I will adjust my overall saturation just a little bit, and I'm looking at the vector scope side by side, so I think I will park it around here. Lastly, there is this shot, which also has a decent amount of green in the highlights. I will apply another instance of color wheels and pull my highlights away from that green just a little bit. And I'm mainly looking at the background here. Have a look at the vector scope, how this rotates. So this is before and this is after. I think we can park it at that, and in terms of saturation, we can also give it a little bit, but I don't want to go too far with that. So I think maybe, you know what, I leave it at where it is. For the sake of this tutorial, I will not do any secondary adjustments, as this video is already as long as it is. But lastly, let's take care of our look development. To do that, I get rid of my comparison viewer, and then I grab another adjustment layer. I will slide it underneath our color management, and I make sure that it covers the entire timeline. So let's rename this real quick. So this is our color space transformation, and this is our look. Having the look adjustment layer underneath the color space transformation just means our look is processed before the color space transformation, so we're still, even with our look development, are taking advantage of the larger color space. Again, I go to my hero shot, I make sure the look is selected, and I dive into my color curves. Yeah, let's do look development with color curves. So first I will go into black and white again, and I will adjust the contrast just a little bit. I have a feeling that we can take advantage of a little bit more contrast for now, and maybe even lift the very black point just a little bit. Okay, with that out of the way, I can delete my check layer so I can see the colors underneath, and let's do a little bit of split toning here. I will use this Luma curve and sample my skin tones to give me an idea where my skin tones are centered, and then I will just add some anchor points to these curves. The first thing I do is pull out some red from the shadows, and again, this is not a look development tutorial, this is just something quick and dirty for the sake of this tutorial. And I will push some more red into the highlights, very subtle. Something like this. Secondly, I take care of my blue channel. I push some blue into the shadows as well, and I will maybe even pull them from the very highlights. So let's see what's going on there. Something like this might be fine. Lastly, let's balance it out with the green channel. I think there's a little bit too much green in the shadows, so I will just create one point down here and pull it down ever so slightly. And okay, let's have a look at the before and after. So this is before and this is after. As far as the look development for a subtle teal and orange look goes, this is where I would park it. Again, this is not supposed to be a look development tutorial, this is just something very, very basic and quick and dirty. If you are interested in learning look development, subscribe and stay tuned. Once we are done with our basic look, I will just scrub through and make sure that our look works on every clip. So let's have a look. And I think, again, for the sake of this tutorial, this works out. As mentioned earlier in this video, if I change my mind about this look, I have the entire freedom to do so. And all my adjustments I did before stay in place. This is what I meant with establishing a strong foundation. This foundation ensures that all of the clips underneath are consistent, so the look will translate to each clip properly. I know this was quite a lot, so let's summarize what we've learned. A good workflow is efficient. This means we minimize the redundancies, for example, by not doing look development for each clip individually, but once for the entire timeline. This makes us timely and mentally efficient. We don't need to do so many things at once. A good workflow is also well structured, meaning we do logical passes. For example, if we take care of exposure and contrast, we perform only exposure and contrast adjustments for every clip in our timeline. Also, we start with the broadest adjustment possible and use targeted adjustments like masks or qualifiers only if they are absolutely necessary. Consequently, it is easy to achieve consistency, which is the ultimate goal. When doing one thing at a time, we can easily compare our shots because we can focus on one thing that currently matters. Yeah, and that's that. If you want to bring your color grading to the next level, book your one-on-one session with me today. The link is in the video description below, but slots are limited. And if you ever wanted to know how bright things should be sure to watch this video next.